We all know the saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. It's a phrase that reminds us not to make assumptions based on outward appearances. It sort of tells you to look deeper, to understand the true nature, value, of quality of something or someone.
A very common theme you'll hear from addicts or alcoholics like myself is we kind of grew up feeling outside of life. The expression we use is, I felt less than.
When I first met Mike Power, my guest this week, and I was impressed by his cover. He's physically fit as you can get. He's run the Boston Marathon twice. He's a strategist, great conversationalist, a wicked sense of humor. It's one of those dry humors that you plant a seed and they really hope you discover things. As I opened the book, as we often do when you go from casual acquaintances to friends, as you dive deeper into their lives, you realize that there's always much more behind the cover.
An insidious thing that started out real good as a nice, way to accentuate elements of my personality that were already there, and then eroded them over time.
Mike's an addict, a cancer survivor. He's a big brain who's looking to unpack some of the secrets of the universe, but also trying to fit into a world where superficiality and skipping across the surface of life is where most people like to be and play.
I look back at my life, it's like those things that have occurred in my life were at one point dreams, and now they're here.
So today we're going to open up the book on the story of Mike Power. And we're going to understand how flow and manifestation not only matters to him, but also to you. Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. Mike Power, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Nice to be here.
When I asked you why you wanted to do this show, you said this to me. I've come to see my purpose in life is to help and serve the 20-year-old me. That everything I've learned and everything I've put in my knapsack could be of immense value to someone that's maybe looking for the answers I was looking for and couldn't find. So Mike, we're going to get into what you were like as a 20-year-old, but I think it's always important to even rewind the tape a little further and talk to me a little bit about your childhood, who you were and how you saw the world.
Being an addict, you introduced me as an addict and alcoholic, and I'm one who's been through recovery. If you're at all familiar with those circles and if you've been exposed to any of that, which, a lot of people haven't, a very common theme you'll hear from addicts or alcoholics like myself is we kind of grew up feeling outside of life. The expression we use is, I felt less than. I judged my insides by everyone else's outsides. Everyone else seemed to have got the instruction manual. They had figured it out. They were acting, out in the world, expressing themselves, playing sports, seeming to fit in, making friends seemed easy. And of course, this was just my perception as a young man. As I got older, I realized that wasn't at all necessarily true. I knew I was smart. Like that part I kind of tuned into right away, and it wasn't a boastful kind of smart. I just sort of saw things. I noticed things. I was extremely sensitive, but also in that same sensitivity, I was objective and I could see things. I was an only child. I had good, loving parents, middle class, a nervous kid, very self-conscious growing up.
I love what you say that, I judge myself by everybody else's outside. And I think now with these false social media stereotypes and everybody living the perfect life and the sense of constant FOMO, we're creating a lot more Mike Powers that sort of judge the cover of these books as opposed to really reflecting on what really is happening when you open the book.
It's the information age, so we find out and hear about almost everything now. So I can't speak empirically about this, but, the rise of suicides, of young people, cyberbullying, and the effects that can have. There's probably a lot more people if they were designed and thrown out into the world as the person that I was, exposed to that, I think it would have just accentuated it and accelerated it for someone like me at that sensitive age.
You started to find some escape, or at least feeling that you could fit into a jigsaw puzzle through alcohol or drugs. I mean, how did that all come about?
I remember very early on in what I call my drinking career that I go, this is it. This is the stuff. So now I had this suit of armor and I had this energy elixir that I could take into my body. And now I could do all those things that I had once only imagined doing. And I'm not exaggerating, but like the idea of dancing in public, no, that wasn't something I was going to do as a young teenager. Going up and talking to strangers, whether they be just, dudes you were trying to get to know, or, the cool kids, but most importantly, girls. I didn't have the, self-confidence or the tenacity to imagine doing that. Not only was I had the courage to do these things, I started becoming this version of myself that I didn't know was even possible. I started to become one of the cool kids. Later in reflection, I called it a chronic kind of cool, where it was my undoing. But all of a sudden, this superficial idea of who I could become was really accelerated through alcohol and drugs. And not only that, but your drinking stories, drug stories, showed a kind of courage, false courage, but, allowed me to connect with people who were the same way.
Did you ever know back then, or was there a tipping point where it went from liquid courage to consuming your life? Instead of giving you what you felt was a suit of armor, if anything, it put a target on your back?
There's a couple points that stand out, but it more felt like I was circling the toilet bowl for about maybe 6-7 years. Life of rinse and repeat, get up, you do it. And slowly things, the pros and cons, the cons started to outweigh the pros. Any kind of addiction is a kind of mental illness. But yeah, there's a couple standout times where I realized I'm in trouble. And that was with alcohol, but I was also addicted to other drugs. I was in New York City with a bunch of friends, and it was another night of partying. And of course, everyone's partying, but I'm probably drinking twice as much as they are. By that time, I developed enough stamina, resilience that you wouldn't necessarily know that I was drunk, but I would be. And the hangover started getting tremendous. And I remember being in Manhattan, somewhere downtown, where at some busy store, I started to have a panic attack. I knew it was a physical panic attack, because it was related to withdrawal from alcohol. And I knew right in that moment that if I had a drink, I would get rid of this. So I got in a cab and I went back to the place we were staying. I had 2 stiff drinks and I felt much better. And in that instant, I go, you're in trouble. Self-knowledge will not cure the alcoholic. I spent a lot of time after that. And in fact, I became addicted to harder drugs in some perverted and messed up, only an addict can think this way, attempt to get off alcohol. So it's like, well, I'll switch to this because, man, this alcohol thing is too much. I can't take it anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. So I ended up switching to something way worse for me.
How did you feel when you hit that bottom? And what's it like to realize that you've fallen as far as you can?
I'm one of those people that believe without a bottom, you can't get better. What a lot of sort of recovery programs try to do is raise the bottom, so that you don't have to go as deep to realize that you're there. Almost at that worst moment is the exact moment when all the ingredients start to show up that are going to aid in your recovery. So it was super painful to get to that bottom, and I had to burn everything to the ground to start over again. I got to reinvent who this guy was. The tune didn't change. I didn't change. It's just that this thing I was looking for in my life, I was looking for in the wrong places. I was looking for it through crutches like alcohol and drugs and superficial achievements and how I looked on the outside. So I was still looking for the same thing, but now I started to look for it in a new place, a fresher place, a more promising place, a more real place.
When you started to get better, did you ever fall off the wagon again? Because what I understand from talking to addicts, that is the hands feel good on those rungs and you're pulling yourself up, and then you feel, well, I'm now in control of who I am, so I can drink responsibly. Or did you realize that if you even went near that, there wouldn't be a ladder there?
So by the time I got to a place where I wanted to get well, I desperately wanted to get well. I would have done anything to get better. Now I hit such a bottom that I realized that I was in a prison. The gravitas of it, the complete powerlessness of it, I never wanted to feel that way again. So no, I didn't have a lot of yearnings. People would say to me, oh, Mike, you had a lot of discipline. You had so much strength in getting sober. My personal strength had nothing to do with it. It was like I'd got to a place through this bottom of complete powerlessness and then the ultimate surrender to where I wanted to go. And the sort of the true spirit inside of me, I never looked back.
I'm curious that when you're at this bottom, you're in this prison, How long does it take you to rebuild the trust of people that used to believe in you and you must have disappointed time and time again?
A lot of time in those early days, there was the boy that cried wolf, that story kept recurring to me. I go, oh my God, I'm that boy. I'm that person now because I lied so much that now, even though I know I'm telling the truth, no one else would necessarily believe me. So there's that rebuilding of trust. It happens quicker than you think because people can tell when you're on solid ground again. And because I was in early recovery, it was the focus was less and less about other people. And it was more about what was happening inside of me. I was less living externally and I was more living internally. So I allowed them and accepted their lack of faith and belief in me. And I honored that. And I knew that I deserved it in a way. And the other thing is I ran into a guy I used to drink with in recovery. I went through the 12 steps of recovery. So Alcoholics Anonymous. And he just said, Mike, I'm glad you're here. I just want you to know the best thing I can tell you is it takes a long time to get sober. And I learned over the next couple of years what he meant by that. There's a lot of untangling. There's a lot of evolution and sort of mindset and how you see, perceive yourself in life that needs to sort of be it needs to be undone.
Without the liquid courage, I remember you sharing a story of dating who is now your life partner. You're driving a van, there's a baby seat in the back, you're recovering from a major illness. How did you ever find it within yourself that was enough to be attracted to someone else?
We're going to talk today about my version of manifesting and the power of this program that I want to share with the world. But, at the time, I may have been an alcoholic and I may have been a drug addict, and these were avenues that I'd went down that took me to dead ends in my life. But they were never me. There was a me that was always there, unrestricted, uninhibited, no permanent damage done. So the person I always was reemerged. I was more true to myself. I was just being who I was, who I'd always been. And I just didn't need the crutches anymore. My sense of fun, my sense of expression, my ability to make connections and talk to people and form personal relationships, all that was still there. In fact, it was better than before because it was uninhibited by some of my addictive tendencies.
So just before we pivot to your book, Flow, and where I think that our audience is going to get so much value from how you've journaled and put your journey onto paper, because I think everybody is on some quest where self-reflection and improvement is part of it. You said it, and I thought it was very profound. This is like kindergarten. It was like starting all over. What was that sort of kindergarten stage that had you start discovering that inside of Mike Power was just this extraordinary human being?
The spiritual kindergarten, actually, the 12-step program, the original author of it, Bill Wilson, called their program that. What we're actually operating here is a spiritual kindergarten. They were using spiritual principles to help people get over alcohol and drugs. This is your start, and that's a good segue into where our discussion's going too, because, the very principles that allowed me to get over alcohol and drugs and overcome other hardships in my life are also the very same principles and energies that allow you to make fantastic things happen in your life, big things happen, make dreams come true, so it's the same ingredients, it's the same elements, but you had to start where you started. And where I was starting at that time was, like I said, a life that had been burnt to the ground, damages done, things to be made up, money to be repaid, a self-identity to be restored. So yeah, that starting place is so critical. Those principles that might ladder up to greatness one day, in the very beginning, have to be about survival. And I went through a fair amount of time where, humility became an operative word. It's like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to take direction. And, that direction for me came from forces around me and outside of me and other human beings, and I remember one time I started working again in early recovery, and I got up and living with my parents again. I'm going to get ready to go to work, and I grabbed these 2 pairs of socks, and they don't match. It stumped me. I didn't know what to do. I sat down in the bed, literally scratching my head, going, what do I do now? And that was the state I was in. I had a sponsor. You probably heard of those in 12-step programs. And I'd say that person saved my life. They were fantastic, and they're still friends. We're still good friends today, and they started my journey. For about 2 years, I called them every day. Somehow today, I still call them, but I don't have any problems. What was the difference?
When we come back, Mike Power and I talk about flow. And I mean that literally, because we're going to talk about his book, his workshop, and how everything he's learned, he's now applying to help others overcome their circumstances.
Hi, this is Tony Chapman, host of the radio show and podcast Chatter That Matters. Did you know that only 1 in 5 youth with a mental health illness can get access to the care they need? Well, a big shout out to the RBC Foundation and RBC Future Launch for supporting over 150 youth mental health organizations. And in doing so, they help youth and their families get the care they need and deserve.
I started to have a panic attack. I knew it was a physical panic attack because it was related to withdrawal. And I knew right in that moment that if I had a drink, I would get rid of this. So I got in a cab and I went back to the place we were staying, and I had 2 stiff drinks and I felt much better. And in that instant, I go, you're in trouble.
My guest today is Mike Power, recovering addict, cancer survivor, found himself deeply in debt with 0 prospects. He hit rock bottom and then he started climbing. So let's move the conversation to this fantastic book called Flow. How did it come about? Was it more just part of your healing and your journey, or was it truly you felt that maybe your calling now in life was to take these circumstances you overcame, and as you said very early on when we talked about this interview, and make it available to those people that might be looking at how to change their future?
I got introduced to basic principles, in this kindergarten that were kind of like new, but not. They were very familiar. It's like, oh, I remember this. I remember feeling this way before I diverted my attention into living, in this maximum control world where I was going to control every aspect of living through drugs and alcohols and success and how I was seen and what I looked like and how I dressed and all the things that I did that made me cool. Before that, I had a different, more fundamental sort of connection with what I would call life. Let's call it the universe. It got me sober. Mindfulness and prayer is the power that got me sober. I just kept building on it. When you're done kindergarten, you go to grade 1, you go to grade 2, grade 3. This started to have all the things I'd been looking for in my other way of living. So why wouldn't I do more of it? And I started to go through what recovery circles would call a psychic change. How I looked at myself, how I looked at life, kind of went through a really revolutionary new update. I devoured text. I read the Stoics. I read philosophy. I read, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer. I became a seeker. This thing that I'd been looking for earlier in my life, I was starting to find. And what I would define it as is power, but true power. To do what? I don't know, be happy, to feel content, to feel safe, make up, overcome that kid who started out in life and felt like, I couldn't give an inch up. I once read a quote that alcoholism and addiction is the doomed attempt to control every aspect of life. And then the alternative to that was being open to life and this paradox of striving and moving forward while at the same time letting go. Anyway, so this really just opened up new worlds for me. I thought about it. I talked about it. Our program, we deal with newcomers a lot, and you try to help other people through what we call our experience, strength, and help. And so it's something I spoke about because people would say, well, how did you do this? How did this happen? And then I started to notice that my life was big. Dreams were coming true for me. I got curious and I started to make these connections with things that I had put, even in my burnt to the ground phase of life. Those things were all on my wish list at some point. There's times where I'm with my wife and I look at her and I feel like I literally dreamed her into existence. I say, well, how'd that happen? Then I look at other aspects of my life, and I was going through cancer and I was at the tail end of chemo, and it was 2 weeks before Christmas, and the firm I was with, a global marketing firm fired me for some trumped up reason. There I was without a job, approaching Christmas, not yet finished my chemo. A few months later, I was now squarely landed in the career I'd always dreamed of. I was a consultant. I was making twice as much money. I was doing things that I always dreamed of doing. Those type of connections started to fire off my mind, and I started writing about it. And that kind of led to the program that I'm now calling Flow Manifest.
You have your own definitions of flow and manifestation, because to me, those two words, I'd add mindfulness, are almost like the words like excellence 2 decades ago. Everybody just throws it out, puts in part of their vernacular. But I really enjoyed how you've compressed those words. And then when you release them, they truly are this magic carpet ride of positivity and possibility.
The way I spoke about those two concepts of flow and manifest are different and more expansive and sort of bigger. And I like to think even more optimistic than the way the rest of the world or most people talk about those two concepts. If you take manifesting, there's things like The Secret. And I'm not putting any of these programs down, but they all seem to sort of be mystical and some kind of mind hack where it's like, well, if I envision something bad enough, then it will come true, and I can use the power of my mind to make it happen. I just believe that the idea of manifestation could be even more practical than that. Mind power and mindset is definitely one part of it, but there's some practical and methodical approaches that you can apply to your life. The only watch out is we're not in charge always of the timetable. I can't make things happen instantly, but like I was sharing with you a couple minutes ago, I look back in my life, it's like those things that have occurred in my life were at one point dreams that were just listed on a piece of paper, and now they're here. To me, that's manifesting. And then my definition of flow, the standard one would be more in the neuroscience world of flow, about peak performance. And, we all heard about athletes in the zone. And to me, my definition of flow does include that. But I think flow is more of an energy state that's always available to us. Probably can't spend all our time there, but we can spend a lot more time there than we do currently. Flow is just that higher state of energy that we can tap into that allows great things to come to life, it allows us to sort of more freely express our talents, to develop those talents, to be more productive, bring great things out into the world.
How important is state of mind? Because one of my reasons for doing Chatter That Matters, I think the world is just so bombarded with negativity that we just can't help but feel impossibility. How important is it to have the right state of mind to pick up a book like yours, to open their minds to what you're saying?
I'd say mindset is everything. However, I have a couple of sort of caveats with that. We are human beings. There's such thing as toxic positivity where it's like, well, it's artificial. It's not being real. We can't always be this shiny beacon of optimism and ethereal light, but we can be it more often. And if you think about mindset, it's really not just, well, I'm always going to be positive. It's like, I'm going to be willing to believe that this is possible. And, and a big part of my program especially is overcoming the obstacles in your path. You start where you're at, like any journey towards building the dreams of your life, the ultimate life that you want for yourself. You're going to have to overcome some barriers. And about 99% of those barriers are you.
You spend a lot of time in the strategy front, and I know you've worked all over the world and you're highly regarded, but when I listen to you, it's almost like that's your job, but where your passion is, if you could rewrite the rules, would be much more on some of the people that you've read in the past, the philosophers, the people on psychology, the people that are into psychic transformation. And how do you balance those two in terms of what you need to do to pay your bills? And you're very good at it, so you must get a lot of enjoyment from it, but also where I think your journey has led you to today. Like, how do you manifest so that you're creating the future Mike Power wants?
I do get paid to do a certain thing, which seems completely separate from all these things I'm talking about. Any person can bring soul to what they do. Flow Manifest is really about living from the soul, bringing your soul to stuff. So can I be a soulful strategist? Yeah. When I do branding for clients, I try to make it soul deep. It's based on real truths. It's based on optimistic beliefs. This program that I was talking about, I first tried it out and built it for corporate life, as teams. I found in the professional world, when it comes to planning people's futures, which what a strategist does quite a bit. And I found the limits in that space was people either didn't know how to use imagination and creativity to imagine and envision this future state, or if they did, they couldn't connect it with sort of practical application and ways of carrying it through and making it happen. So many things we do as corporate is this sort of disembodied identity, whereas it's the people within the team that are neglected because we just treat them as kind of a widget that's going to work together to make this great thing happen, as opposed to, no, they got pulses, they got hearts, they got dreams, personal things that they're trying to translate and express through their work too. That's where I kind of started. I call it a testing ground because I always knew that I wanted to take this passion project to the personal space.
And I think that what you're talking about is transformation versus show me the transaction. Show me how that's going to move the numbers. What's that going to do for my market share? As opposed to saying, when you start talking about things like bringing soul to the project, igniting imagination, empowering people, that's tough to do in a corporate world. What do you tell that young 20-year-old Mike Power now that you're one of the philosophers that helped you get to where you are? Bring some of your philosophy back to the young people out there, and many of them are struggling.
The program I've designed is actually for people all over the place. It's people that are stuck, either those who are facing addiction and going through that horrible thing I went through. But in fact, that work I do for free, I give that away because that's sort of my paying back for the service that got me healthy. But then there's other people who are just stuck in different ways. Like they got stuck down a path. They pursued the wrong version of a dream. They thought that they could get it through different means. And now they're going, where am I? What do I do now? And then there's also those seekers, those people that are always looking for the next rung. They're just expansive in their view. And something like me and my program is just one more aspect. It's just one more way to look at it, just that next breath of inspiration for them to say, okay, this is just part of my march. I guess it's as essential or as simple as saying, you're so much more than you think you are. And these things that you're worried about, that you're scared of, you don't need to worry. You're going to be okay. In fact, I had a friend way back then who used to say, Mike's going to succeed in spite of himself.
I know you now as a friend, and I would say you've channeled this itch to scratch. And you talked about it, healthy things. You are avid in terms of in the gym, a golfer, a runner. How important is it for people to realize that if this is how you're wired, you need to feed it as opposed to deny it, but you don't have to feed it with things that are going to push you to the bottom, but in fact, they can help you get to the top?
I've gone through this sort of, let's say right now in this phase of my life, in this place where what I'm calling free flow expression. And the free is from that kid I used to be, the one who would have gone to the gym because I was the skinny guy, from those comic books on the beach who had the sand kicked in his face. And I had something to prove to life or to the world and to myself. I now might do a lot of those same things, but it comes from a much different place. The reasons, the whys behind the dreams have changed fundamentally, So when I go to the gym, when I get better at golf, when I run the next half marathon, it's more about expression. My definitions of flow and manifest is just sort of an honest kind of loving expression that I'm putting out. And it's the joy in the doing with less attachment to what it looks like or how it appears or where it's even getting me. Am I going to win the race? I don't know. Am I going to hit my time? I'm going to try. I would say to other people, well, finding your own flow. What is it that purely expresses who you want to be? Get creative, get open to declaring, well, what do I want my life to look like? What kind of experiences do I want to have in life? And then how do I express those without being overly controlling, letting life, kind of the dynamics of life in there and sort of to guide you on your way.
How important is it to have a partner that understands all of this? Because if not, you might be moving in a very different world and universe than someone else.
I believe that good couples can have different interests. So one could call my aspect and focus on flow and manifesting, which evolved over time, and my sort of spiritual beliefs as mine. And I'm sure we share many of them, but, never was it a place where she needed to. And, so where we overlap seems quite comfortable, and there's no pressure on anyone to sort of conform their thinking. So I believe there's room for people to have completely different attitudes about those things.
So, Mike, I always end my podcast with my takeaways. The first one was this: I always judge my inside by everyone else's outside. I've never heard it expressed that way. I worked on the Dove brand for 8 years, and I really started to understand how people are chasing these false beauty stereotypes, social media stereotypes. And I think that's an incredible way to talk about how so many people feel they're on their back feet or standing on shifting sand or not the world's most interesting man because they're judging everyone's outside. The other one that I thought was another interesting meme, and I can tell why you're good at, because part of strategy is to get people to bite into something, is this concept of liquid courage became chronic cool. Such an interesting way to describe of a journey of someone that gets overpowered by what they think brings them power. Everything you thought it was doing for you is actually the wrong thing. The last one is, it comes back to Disney and dream it and you can do it. And I always love that expression, but you really unpacked it today. We are all more than we think we are. We all have a variety of souls inside us. What you're bringing out with your book and your program, I think, is the opportunity for people, and I hope a lot of people listening do reach out to you. There is an opportunity for them to get on this journey in life, even if they're really happy, even if they think they're complete, because there's just so much more. As you say, this energy state, we might not be able to get to it all the time, but we certainly can find it many more times. So for all of that and more, Mr. Mike Power, appreciate you being on the show.
I appreciate being here. Thanks so much for the time, Tony.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.